A close-up on a set of keys. Narrator's trembling hand inserts one into a new lock. The look on my stepmother's face when she realized she couldn't enter what was once my childhood home. That moment was worth every penny of my inheritance and 5 years of careful planning. I remember the day my mother died vividly, even though I was only 8 years old. Dad and I clung to each other during the funeral, two incomplete pieces of a family portrait suddenly missing its center. "It's just us now, Rowan," he'd whispered, his calloused hand squeezing mine. "We'll figure it out together." And for 4 years we did. Those were simple days. Dad teaching me to fish in the creek behind our house, me helping him repair the porch swing my grandfather had built. That house was everything to us. My grandfather had constructed it with his own hands after returning from war, each wooden beam holding decades of our family's history. I knew every creaking floorboard, every nick in the banister, every secret spot where the winter drafts would sneak in. Then Victoria entered our lives. I was 12 when Dad introduced her at dinner. Her smile practiced and perfect. Her two children, Marcus and Elise, standing behind her with identical vacant expressions. "She makes me happy, Rowan," Dad explained later that night, his eyes pleading for my understanding. I nodded because I wanted that for him. Happiness. How could I have known what would follow? The wedding happened quickly, and our quiet home transformed. Victoria redecorated rooms that had remained untouched since Mom died. "This place needed a woman's touch," she'd say, discarding Mom's handmade curtains or the ceramic vase I'd made her in school. Each replacement felt like another memory being erased. Once, I found her removing family photos from the hallway. When I protested, her hand whipped across my face so fast I barely saw it coming. "This is my home now," she hissed, her fingernails digging into my arm as she pulled me close. "You'd do well to remember that." The red imprint of her hand on my cheek became a pattern over the years, always in moments when Dad wasn't around to witness. Slowly, methodically, Victoria built walls between Dad and me. Family dinners became rare as she insisted on date nights or trips with just her children. When I graduated high school, Dad missed the ceremony because Victoria had suddenly planned a weekend getaway. I watched other parents embracing their children while I stood alone in my cap and gown. That night, I punched a hole through my bedroom wall, blood streaking my knuckles as I finally released years of silent frustration. Despite everything, I fought to maintain my relationship with Dad. We'd steal moments in his workshop when Victoria was out, or I'd join him for early morning fishing before the rest of the house woke. "You're just like your mother," he'd say, his eyes crinkling with pride. "Same stubborn spirit." Those words became my armor against Victoria's coldness. After college, I took a job overseas, partly for the opportunity, partly to escape the suffocating atmosphere of what had once been my sanctuary. Dad and I spoke weekly on the phone, his voice growing frailer with each passing month. "I'm not doing so well, son," he admitted finally, after years of claiming everything was fine. "The doctors say my heart." His voice had broken then, and mine had too. 3 years abroad, and all the while, that house, my grandfather's legacy, pulled at me like a lodestone. In my dreams, I walked its halls, ran my fingers along the carved mantelpiece where Dad and I had hung our stockings, stood on the porch where Mom had taught me to dance in the rain. It wasn't just a building of wood and stone. It was the physical embodiment of every moment that had shaped me. And somewhere deep inside, I always knew I would have to fight for it. I just never imagined how soon, or how viciously, that fight would come. The call came at 3 a.m. while I was working in Singapore. Victoria's voice, unnervingly calm. "Your father's in the hospital. It's his heart." I booked the first flight home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type my credit card information. 20 hours of travel felt like an eternity. my mind torturing me with images of Dad lying alone, wondering where I was. When I finally reached the hospital, Victoria was seated outside Dad's room like a sentinel. "He's resting," she said, not bothering to stand. "You can see him tomorrow." I pushed past her, my shoulder deliberately knocking hers. "I flew halfway around the world," I growled. "I'm seeing him now." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't stop me. Dad looked small against the white hospital sheets, tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. His face lit up when he saw me, though the effort of smiling seemed to drain him. "Rowan," he whispered, reaching for my hand. "You came." I sat with him through the night, Victoria and her children taking shifts, watching us from the doorway, as if I might steal him away. When Dad dozed off, I'd catch Victoria whispering to the nurses, who would then find reasons for me to leave the room. "Doctor's orders," they'd say. "Family only," they'd insist, despite my protests that I was family, his only blood relative. For 5 days, this cruel dance continued. I'd arrive at the hospital to find Dad heavily sedated, or I'd be told he was having tests when I knew he wasn't. Once, I found Marcus physically blocking the door to Dad's room. When I tried to push through, he shoved me hard against the wall. "Mom says you're upsetting him," he sneered. I felt something snap inside me. My fist connected with his jaw before I could think, the crack of bone against bone echoing in the sterile hallway. Security escorted me out, and Victoria used the incident to restrict my visiting hours further. On what would be my father's final day, I managed just 30 minutes with him. His eyes, those kind eyes that had watched me grow up, found mine with desperate urgency. "The box," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "In my workshop, under the—" Victoria burst in, announcing that Dad needed rest. When I refused to leave, she called security again. As they dragged me away, I saw Dad trying to reach for me, tears streaming down his weathered face. It was the last time I saw him alive. The funeral was a performance directed by Victoria. I was seated in the second row, not beside the casket, with immediate family. She delivered a eulogy about their perfect marriage, while I sat with my hands clenched so tightly my nails drew blood from my palms. When my turn came to speak, Victoria suddenly announced there wasn't enough time for more eulogies. I stood anyway, my grief and rage propelling me to the podium. The microphone cut out as soon as I began speaking. After the service, I drove to the house, my grandfather's house, my house, to collect my remaining belongings. Victoria met me at the door, her children flanking her like bodyguards. "This isn't your home anymore," she said, her lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. "Your father wanted us to have it." She thrust a small box into my hands. "These are your things. The rest has been donated." I opened the box to find random trinkets, none of the photos or keepsakes that had meant something to Dad and me. When I demanded to know where my mother's jewelry was, pieces Dad had promised would come to me, Victoria's hand struck my face, the same slap she'd perfected years ago. "Get off my property," she hissed, "or I'll call the police." 2 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office, listening numbly as he explained the new will Dad had apparently signed just months earlier. The house, the savings, everything went to Victoria. My inheritance? A paltry sum that wouldn't cover a month's rent in most cities. "I'm sorry," the lawyer said, not meeting my eyes. "The will appears to be legally binding." I drove to the coast that night, stood on the edge of a cliff with the wind whipping around me, and screamed until my voice gave out. Something had been stolen from me that was worth far more than property or money: my last moments with my father, my chance to say goodbye, my family heritage. As the waves crashed below, I made a promise to the night sky. This wasn't over. I didn't leave town after the funeral like Victoria expected. Instead, I rented a shabby studio apartment and began my investigation. The will seemed suspicious. Dad would never have cut me out so completely. I hired a private investigator with almost half of my meager inheritance, living on ramen noodles and working night shifts at a warehouse to make ends meet. 3 weeks later, the PI called with news that sent electricity through my veins. The property deed had never been updated after Dad married Victoria. Legally, the house had remained solely in his name, which meant it should have been part of his estate. More importantly, the PI had uncovered evidence that Dad's signature on the new will might have been forged. Not enough to overturn it in court without more evidence, he warned, but definitely fishy. That same day, I drove past the house and noticed Victoria had already painted over the blue trim Dad and I had refreshed every spring. Through the window, I could see workers removing the built-in bookshelves my grandfather had crafted. Something primal roared inside me. I nearly stormed the place then and there, but instead I channeled that rage into a plan. First, I needed money, a lot of it. I took a second job bartending and sold my car for a beat-up truck. Every penny went into savings. I slept 4 hours a night and worked the rest. My hands developed calluses, then cracks that bled when I clenched my fists. But with each deposit into my bank account, I felt closer to reclaiming what was mine. 6 months after Dad's death, I made my move. Using information from the PI, I learned Victoria had been behind on property taxes. The house needed expensive repairs she couldn't afford, repairs Dad would have known how to make himself. Her financial situation was precarious. I created a holding company with a lawyer friend, disguising my involvement completely. Then came my riskiest move. I needed to search the workshop for whatever Dad had tried to tell me about on his deathbed. One Tuesday, when I knew Victoria would be at her weekly hair appointment, I slipped onto the property. The workshop was padlocked, but I knew where Dad kept the spare key. Inside a hollow stone turtle by the garden. Some things never change. The workshop smelled like him, sawdust and motor oil. For a moment, I was paralyzed by grief. Then I remembered. The box under the... Under what? I methodically searched every inch, crawling on hands and knees, tapping for hollow spaces. In the corner sat my grandfather's massive oak desk, the one Victoria had tried to sell at a garage sale years ago, the one Dad had adamantly kept despite her complaints about its size. I ran my hands along its underside and felt something, a small drawer hidden in the frame, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, along with a USB drive and a copy of his original will, dated just 2 weeks before his hospitalization. In it, he left the house to me, with provisions for Victoria to receive a generous cash settlement. Attached was a handwritten note. In case anything happens to me, Victoria doesn't know about this. Get it to Robert Michaels at Carlton Law, if needed. It was signed and notarized. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, I didn't get to say goodbye properly." I slid to the floor, Dad's words washing over me like his voice from beyond. He explained how he'd grown suspicious of Victoria's behavior, how she'd been pressuring him to change his will. The USB contained recordings of arguments where she'd threatened him. "The house belongs to you," he wrote. "It's your birthright. I was a fool not to see what was happening until it was almost too late." I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face, a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. A noise startled me, the front door of the house opening. Quickly, I pocketed everything and slipped out the workshop's back door, seconds before Elise walked down the garden path. That night, I read Dad's letter a dozen times. His final gift wasn't just evidence. It was his voice reaching out to me one last time, acknowledging what I'd known all along. With a clarity I hadn't felt since before his death, I called the lawyer Dad had mentioned. It was time to reclaim what was mine. The next 3 months unfolded like an elaborate chess match. With Dad's original will and the recordings as leverage, my lawyer contacted Victoria with terms. She could fight us in a messy public probate battle that would expose her attempted fraud, or she could agree to a quiet settlement. Her lawyer countered, negotiations dragged on, but I held firm. Meanwhile, my holding company made an offer on the house through a bank, claiming it was an investment property. Victoria, desperate for cash and unaware of my involvement, accepted the offer. The irony was exquisite. She sold my inheritance back to me, thinking she was screwing over some faceless corporation. I signed the papers using my middle name to avoid detection, my hand steady as I reclaimed my birthright with a few strokes of a pen. On moving day, I waited until Victoria had removed the last of her belongings. She left the front door unlocked, assuming the new owners wouldn't arrive until the following week. I walked through each empty room, running my hands along the walls my grandfather had raised. Then I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed, adding a state-of-the-art security system for good measure. The next morning, Victoria returned, probably to take fixtures or whatever else she could strip from the house. I watched through the window as she tried her key in the new lock, confusion spreading across her face. When she rang the doorbell, I answered. The color drained from her face. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to push past me into the foyer. I blocked her path, savoring the moment. "I live here," I said simply. "This is my home. Always has been." She lunged at me, nails aiming for my face like she'd done so many times before. This time, I caught her wrist mid-air. "Touch me again," I said quietly, "and I'll have you arrested for assault and trespassing." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I sold this house to Meridian Holdings." I smiled. "I am Meridian Holdings." I pulled out the deed with my signature. "And you sold it for less than it's worth because you were desperate. Karma's a fascinating thing, isn't it?" She screamed obscenities, threatened lawsuits, finally broke down in tears, a performance worthy of an award. When none of it worked, she tried a new angle. "Your father would be ashamed of you," she spat. That's when I revealed my final card. I held up Dad's letter. Actually, he left instructions. Would you like to hear them? The look of horror on her face confirmed what I'd suspected. She knew about the letter, but had never found it. "Get off my property," I said, using her exact words from months before. "Or I'll call the police." As Victoria stormed to her car, Marcus and Elise appeared, having waited outside. Marcus charged toward me, fist raised. I stood my ground, catching his punch and using his momentum to spin him around. "The security cameras are already recording," I warned. "Make a choice." After a tense moment, he backed away, putting his arm around his mother as they left. Perhaps the first genuine family moment I'd witnessed between them. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom. I'd brought only a sleeping bag and pillow, but I'd never rested better. Over the coming weeks, I restored what Victoria had changed, repainting the blue trim, reinstalling bookshelves, hanging family photos in the hallway again. In the workshop, I found Dad's unfinished projects and completed them one by one. 6 months later, as I was repairing the porch swing, a letter arrived from Victoria's lawyer. I expected another legal threat, but instead found signed documents relinquishing any further claims to the property, along with Dad's wedding ring that I thought had been lost forever. No note, no explanation, just a silent acknowledgement of defeat. The house is fully mine now, in law and in spirit. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the living room and feel the presence of those who came before. My grandfather who built these walls, my mother who filled them with love, my father who fought to preserve them for me. I've learned that home isn't just a place. It's a connection to your past and a foundation for your future. I won my battle with Victoria, but the victory that matters most is reclaiming my family's legacy. I still have Dad's letter framed in my office. The last line reads, "Remember, son, it's not about the house itself. It's about what it represents. Stand your ground, but don't let bitterness consume you. That's the last lesson I can teach you." It took me losing everything to understand what I truly had. And now, as I look toward the future, I know that these walls will someday hold new memories, new laughter, a new generation. Because that's what Dad wanted all along, for this house to remain a home.